As we all know, New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio Cortez has been in the news a lot lately. She recently released the Green New Deal, a resolution that has gotten a lot of attention for its 100% renewable energy goal, but it also vaguely references another source of emissions. The resolution calls for World War II-style mobilization efforts to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions for agricultural operations. The resolution also calls for meeting 100% of the power demand in the United States through clean, renewable, and zero-emission energy sources, including dramatically expanding renewable power sources and deploying new capacity. Also, the resolution calls for upgrading all existing buildings in the United States. Yes, you heard it right. Ocasio-Cortez wants to upgrade all existing buildings in the United States. The resolution also wants to ensure jobs are high-quality union jobs that pay prevailing wages and guarantees wage and benefit parity for workers that are affected by transition from fossil fuels. Ocasio-Cortez also calls for stopping current and preventing future historic oppressions of what she calls frontline and vulnerable communities in the United States. Some of these communities defined in the bill are indigenous people, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, and people with disabilities. Anyway, we all know by now that this bill is pretty ridiculous, but let's watch Tucker Carlson analyzing Ocasio-Cortez and her character with Nicholas Giordano, Suffolk Community College professor. And he also looks at current state of U.S. politics and how it is possible for someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to be so popular with young people.
In her brief time in the political limelight, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has said a lot of interesting stuff. Here's one thing she said.
An agency like ICE, which repeatedly and systematically violates human rights, does not deserve a dime.
That's right.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. This is the war. This is our World War II.
I think that there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right.
So not only dumb and totally ignorant of everything, but utterly self-assured. If there were a clinical exam for self-esteem, she'd be in the 100th percentile. How do people get like that? Is it our education system? Is it high schools? Is it colleges? We wanted to talk to someone on the front lines of this who might know the answer. Nicholas Giordano is a professor of political science at Suffolk Community College, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks very much for coming on.
Hi, Tom.
So there's a certain recognizable syndrome here where the people who know the least are the most self-confident. Where does that come from?
Well, it's the lack of critical thinking that exists. It's the superficial arguments they make that are completely unrealistic. If you look at the Green New Deal, it's incomprehensible. And when you're looking at it, she says the world's going to end in 12 years. So if we go with this plan and have to rebuild every building, it took us 13 years just to build the Freedom Tower, for instance. 6 years to build the Tappan Zee Bridge. Imagine having to do every single building in the United States up to new codes. It's just not going to work. And it's that they don't ask deep questions. The arguments are, it sounds good, people will support it because it's government giving us stuff, and so it's okay. But there are real consequences when you actually talk like this, because there are people that are going to take it seriously. You have a number of presidential candidates that have agreed with her plan. And when you're looking at the plan itself, you can't understand anything in it. It would lead to millions of people being underemployed or unemployed. Maybe they could learn code, who knows. It would lead to unconstitutional state violations because state and local governments are in charge of building codes. And so my question to her would be, has she read the Constitution, knows about the 10th Amendment and state rights?
No, but you heard, but I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding. You heard her say what matters is that she's a really good person and you're not. And so I'm thinking, as I'm watching this, remember that whole fad where we were supposed to give our kids self-esteem and that was the panacea? Did we create people like this when we did that?
Well, we did. Two things. The motto of the customer is always right created an entitlement culture, and then our children are precious also created the entitlement culture where everyone gets the trophy. When you're looking at it and you're trying to challenge the minds of the youth, they try and push back because they don't want to critically analyze the information to see if it really works. Page 10 of her New Deal talks about creating public ownership and receiving a percentage of compensation for the public ownership. Well, that's socialism. That's the very definition of socialism, and nobody's called her out on it in a sense. And it didn't work out so well for Venezuela. So is it really going to work out well for us?
No, not. I mean, I don't know. It's been great for, I guess, weight loss in Venezuela. They're starving.
They are,
eating zoo animals. No,
and that's part of the problem. There's no critical thinking. And not only do you have that part, you have even more concerning, it talks about persons of the United States. It doesn't say U.S. citizens or U.S. persons, which is a definition for citizen and legal residence.
No, you're right.
So that raises the question.
Anyone who shows up gets to take your stuff. I mean, you can see where this is going. Professor, we're out of time, unfortunately. I commend you for having the patience to try and train a more impressive next generation of critical thinkers. Thank you for that.
No problem.
So what would happen to the United States if we abruptly got rid of fossil fuels? Mark Stein lives in a cold place, and in fact, heats with wood, so he's thought about this, and he joins us tonight. So we enact the AOC plan, what happens?
Well, the AOC plan strikingly pledges to get rid of most forms of transportation and indeed cows. So you can give up your Chevy Suburban and take your cow to work. The cow actually is more devastating to the environment than the Chevy Suburban. Alexandria Ocasio Cortez's document actually says that she's committed to ridding America of flatulent cows and airplanes. I always take a flatulent cow on an airplane as my emotional support animal. It means that 20 minutes out of LAX, you've got the whole first-class compartment all to yourself. Nobody's in there. But the Europeans actually tried this. And they basically, the Irish were going to impose a tax of 13 euros per cow, and the Danes were going to impose a tax of 80 euros per cow, because apparently a Danish Holstein is 6 times as flatulent as an Irish Hereford. So in theory, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is onto something that you could, as the Europeans considered, actually have a flatulence offset regime. Obviously, you'd need a secretary of flatulence in the cabinet that would actually, Vermont, for example, has a lot of Holsteins. They're the black and white cows that look like the governor of Virginia with only half his makeup on. And you could take those, Vermont would be able to trade its flatulence to Washington, D.C., where it could hang like a giant cloud over Congress. I've read this document in some detail. I think there are a lot of very interesting ideas in here.
One of them, I just want to reassure our viewers, you're not joking, you have read it, and it does say that she would like to get rid of airplanes and replace them with trains. That doesn't seem like a giant leap forward to me.
No, well, everybody's, for example, the railroads were wood-fired. You couldn't actually, when they started, you couldn't actually do that now. The whole point of this is that if light rail was effective, Democrats like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez what they actually want is to cease movement of people. And it's amazing when even supposedly conservative parties like the UK Conservative Party actually considered giving citizens a carbon allowance to prevent them, for example, taking long-haul flights to vacations in Florida. Now, when the Soviets tried to do it, we called that totalitarianism. Suddenly, all you have to do is put an environmental label on it, and everyone is in favor of restricting freedom of movement. I mean, that's where this is headed.
They're more self-righteous than the Soviets ever were. She is. That's
true.
Mark Stein, great to see you. Thank you. And your
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
We begin today with Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. We'll get to Virginia in just a second. Don't worry, I'll give you all the updates. But just recently, breaking news, she has released a brand new plan, a Green New Deal plan that changes America forever. Because she's a fresh face. So fresh, so face. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez got in a Twitter fight with my business partner, Jeremy Boring, last night. Jeremy made the point on Twitter that I had made yesterday on the show because we steal from each other on a routine basis. That's why we make great business partners. He made the point that she is, in fact, not a victim, while she has been claiming to be a victim and cheering herself for being a woman in Congress. And she tweeted something back about how the fact that she is the only 29-year-old bartender in Congress means that Congress is just not representative, which makes no sense at all, by the way, because if we were just to take a demographic breakdown out of like 500 people, how many are 29-year-old bartenders? Maybe one out of 500 people across America. I don't think the demographics work out that way. Also, it doesn't make any sense to suggest that the American Congress is supposed to be broken down demographically akin to the American population, because we have majoritarian voting in the United States. 53% of voters in the United States are women, which means that if women voted as a block, everyone in Congress would be a woman. So that's not how voting works. That's not how representation works. But AOC doesn't know things, but she has great fashion sense, and she can make stuff in an instant pot, and she's sassy. So that's all that counts. And now she has a brilliant new Green New Deal plan. It is so brilliant that even people on the left are laughing at it today because it's just absurd. So she has now released her Green New Deal plan. Here's the overview. I love it so much. It's so great because this is the future, guys. And if you don't embrace the future, it's because you're afraid of the future. Like, unbelievable. You're unbelievably afraid of the future. Like, if people would just think, like, about 20 years, like, down the line, then they would know that, like, this is what we have to, like, do.